Welcome to the Robert William Rutlen and Elizabeth Jane run Rutlen Lecture on Faith and Creation. My name is Catherine Schifferdecker. I teach Old Testament here at Luther Seminary, and I'll serve as the moderator for this evening's lecture. Special welcome to the hundreds of people that are joining us streaming online tonight, and of course, welcome to those of you in person as well. We're so happy that you could join us. I should say welcome on behalf of President Robin Steinke, who was unable to be with us here tonight, the president of the seminary, but welcome on behalf of the whole community of Luther Seminary. Just a word about logistics for the evening. So in that handout that you got, there's a schedule on the back. We're starting a few minutes early, which tells you that we're holding this schedule just a little loosely. So this is a guideline for what we're doing, and we'll be within 10 minutes or so of the times here, and we will have this order of service, so to speak, here. Just a word about how this is going to work. So part one will be primarily a slideshow that our lecturer, William Brown, will give. And we have screens all around the room, so hopefully you're able to see from where you're sitting. But there are also booklets on each table that have the images of the slides on them. So if you have some issue with seeing a screen, you're welcome to look at that booklet as well. After that, Bill will go to talk to the online people, and the main course will be served in the room, and we'll have questions for you to discuss around the table. Part two will be more of a conversation between Bill and myself, then table conversations again around the table. Dessert will be served during that part, after part two. And then part three, continued conversation, table conversations again around the table. And then what's not on the schedule is we'll have just a very, very brief wrap up at the end of the evening. So during the times of table conversations here, Bill will be in another room taking questions from the people online. So that's when you guys will have a chance to engage with our lecturer. So again, hold that just a little loosely. The order will be the same, but the time's probably not completely as listed. So what is the Rutlen Lecture on Faith and Creation? The Rutlen Lecture on Faith and Creation is a biannual lecture series designed to examine the intersection between faith and creation care and faith and eco-justice. David Rutlen, a member of the seminary's board of directors, established this series to honor his family's passion for environmental justice and God's creation. Previous Rutlen lectures here at Luther Seminary include Ellen Davis, Randy Woodley, and Larry Rasmussen, who's also an alum of Luther Seminary. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce David Rutlen. David is a board member, as we said, and a donor to Luther Seminary. He's also a distinguished retired cardiologist, chief of cardiology at several teaching hospitals. And we consider him one of our own, especially since his grandfather was a Finnish Lutheran American pastor, and his father always wanted to be a pastor. And so would you join me in thanking David? Would you mind standing, David? And let's thank him. Yeah.
It's not in public, and it's been so successful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you for your generosity. We really honor you and thank you for your donations to the seminary. Now it's my privilege to introduce our speaker for this evening, William P. Brown. Oh, you know what? Sorry, I forgot one thing. I'm going to say grace because once I introduce Bill, he's going to go ahead and do the slides. So as I was sitting, my colleague and friend Ralph Jacobson suggested that we use Luther's Table Grace, Martin Luther's Table Grace, which is adapted from Psalm 104. So if you'll pray with me. The eyes of all look to you, O Lord, to give them their food in due season. You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing. Lord, we thank you for this food before us, for the hands that prepared it, for the farmers that raised it. We ask you to bless it for our strength and for service to our neighbor. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. And I should say thank you to Sam, who is our cook. He's just a wonderful, yeah, please join me in thanking Sam. By the way, I was told to remind you, I think you were already told this, but you are welcome to start eating right now. And even during the slideshow, so feel free to eat the appetizers on the table. All right, now to introduce Bill. So Bill Brown, William P. Brown, is a leading Old Testament Hebrew Bible scholar. You can read a brief bio of his on the back of the program. But that doesn't really do justice to the many, many books that he's written and articles, journal articles. He is a pastor and professor in the Presbyterian Church USA at Columbia Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. And I have used several of Bill's books over the years in my own classes in Old Testament. He's particularly a leading scholar in wisdom literature, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, Wisdom of Solomon, Ben Sirach in the Bible, and the Psalms. And one of his favorite books of mine is particularly pertinent for our topic this evening. It's called The Seven Pillars of Creation, the Bible, Science, and the Ecology of Wonder. So as I was thinking about how to introduce Bill, I was rereading the introduction to this book, and I don't think I can do it better than Bill did it himself in the introduction. So I'm going to read just a paragraph that he talks about his own background and then hand it over to him. But I'm going to sit so that I can open the book. So Bill writes, I was raised on science. My father was a farm boy who decided to leave the farm to pursue scientific research. He taught animal science at the University of Arizona until he retired and was my early mentor in all things academic. Having focused on science in high school, I devoted my first 2 years of college to pursuing a degree in engineering. However, through factors entirely unanticipated and much to my parents' dismay, I graduated with a degree in philosophy. Imagine that. Even more surprising, I subsequently found myself studying the Bible in seminary. But up until that time, I had built my own reflecting telescope, helped conduct research in an oncology lab, and drafted rudimentary mining shafts. I was enchanted with nature, both cosmic and microscopic. I still am, he says. And then he finishes the introduction by hoping and wishing that studying the Bible and science together is an exercise in wonder, an experience in joy to the world and to the Word made flesh and fresh. I love that turn of phrase. That's just really beautiful. So please join me in welcoming William Brown, our 2026 Rutlen Lecturer, who will be speaking on Bewildered by Wonder, Just Creation in the Book of Job.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks to all of you. I have had such a delightful time at Luther Seminary past couple days now, really. I got to know some of the faculty, some familiar faces I've caught up with, and administrators and students, and it's just been such a delight to be with you all, and particularly this evening as well. Catherine, thank you for a wonderful introduction. Maybe we should take this on the road together or something. Yeah. So yeah, we're going to talk about the book of Job. And what really got me interested in the book of Job at the very beginning of my early career as a professor is something that a wise Jewish biblical scholar once said. His name was Mattatyahu Tsevat. He said, the book of Job is the only book of the Bible that is against the Bible. What he meant to say is that that the whole system of moral retribution and act consequence is totally dismantled by the story of Job. And he goes on to talk about how God demoralizes the universe. The way I would say it is that the book of Job is the only book of the Bible that reaches beyond the Bible, because it reaches into the cosmos, into creation and all of its depth and extremities. It is a sort of a transcendent book. It is a cosmic book in that respect. Another wise scholar once said that if you try to read the book of Job in one fell swoop, that is, in one sitting, you're going to gag. That's a technical term, by the way. That's an exegetical term, gag. So we're not going to do that tonight. We don't have the time to do that as well. But what I'm going to propose is that we take a look at the book of Job by looking at the ending before we do anything else. And so I'm going to show you some slide presentations of what I consider representative of God's answer to Job at the end of the book, the climax of the book. But before we do that, I am going to show some images thanks to that wonderful British poet and artist William Blake, who composed 22 watercolors that were also engravings of different episodes in Job's life. And so to refresh our memory a little bit about the story of Job, I'm not going to say much in terms of commentary about these images until we get to the images of God's answer to Job. So feel free to look at the screen while you're eating. There we go. Job's family, 7 sons, 3 daughters. And then trouble upstairs in the heavens with this character called the Satan. And then the death of Job's children caused by the Satan with God's permission. And then Job and his so-called 3 friends.
Yeah.
There's Job sitting on his ash heap, and his friends come to comfort and console him. But they did not take Pastoral Care 101. They end up accusing him of all manner of evil. And I like to think that there's Job on his ash heap. He's been banished, he's been isolated, he's been alienated from the community and from what's left of his family, and his friends end up accusing him of all manner of evil. So they sit with him, and then they start pointing their fingers at him. And Job despairs. He laments. He protests. As his despair deepens, so does his anger against his friends and against God. And then finally, God shows up. Now, Job wanted to drag God into court so that God would have to account for God's self, to explain why Job suffers so. But God does not come on Job's terms. God comes in the whirlwind. And so I'm going to read a little bit of what's happening when God addresses Job. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man, I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together, and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? So God takes Job on sort of this poetic tour of the universe. It's as if his ash heap has been turned into sort of a magic carpet, and he's taken to the heights and depths of creation, the cosmos, and to the extremities as well, the dwelling place of light, the expanse of the earth, the gates of death, very deep down below. And then God, after taking this sort of extreme tour of the universe, God settles Job back so that Job can see these and behold these wild creatures. From the lion to Leviathan, 12 creatures, according to my count. And the mystery is, why would God show off these wild creatures? So bear with me. We're going to learn a little bit about some of these creatures and beyond. So this is what God says about the lion. Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their covert? Who provides for the raven as prey when its youngs cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? Now, Job would not have expected the question, can you hunt prey for the lion? I think Job would have expected, can you go and kill the lion? You know, gird up your loins like a man. Go out there and hunt. But God's question to Job is, can you provide for the lion, not hunt and kill it? And then the mountain goats. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the deer? Can you remember the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth, when they crouch to give birth to their offspring and are delivered of their young? The young ones become strong. They grow up in the open. They go forth and do not return to them. The mountain goat. And then there's the onager, or the wild ass, or wild donkey. Who has let the wild ass go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift ass, to which I have given the steppe for its home, and the salt land for its dwelling place? It scorns the tumult of the city. It does not hear the shouts of the driver. It ranges the mountains as its pasture, and it searches after every green thing. And then God describes the wild ox and the ostrich as well, the ostrich in all of its fierceness and fearlessness as it laughs at the horse and its rider. And then these creatures, this litany of wild creatures, conclude with Behemoth and Leviathan. So we're back to William Blake here. These are two more mythical creatures. They are larger than life. Some scholars think Behemoth is patterned off of the hippo and Leviathan off of the crocodile. But they're obviously greater than those creatures. And what God says about Behemoth is really interesting. Look at Behemoth. Behold Behemoth, which I made just as I made you. Or the more literal translation, which I made with you. Its strength is in its loins, and its power in the muscles of its belly. Its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs are like bars of iron. It is the first of the great acts of God. Only its maker can approach it with the sword. Even if the river is turbulent, it is not frightened. It is confident, though Jordan rushes against its mouth. Can one take it with hooks or pierce its nose with a snare? And then the last creature that concludes God's answer to Job is this fearsome creature, Leviathan, this creature of the abyss. And it is described as unequaled in power, unrivaled. And even God brings Job up close to witness the separation of the scales in its underbelly. So Job is taken up close and personal to bear witness to Leviathan. And God concludes with these words, on earth, Leviathan has no equal, a creature without fear. It surveys everything that is lofty. It is king over all that are proud. So endeth the words of God. We could say, the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I want to continue God's answer to Job, in part because I think some of these creatures may be overly familiar. I mean, we watch nature programs on TV, National Geographic, the Disney Channel, Animal Planet. So we know about lions and ostriches. We see them in zoos. They're not so strange and fearsome as perhaps Job might have felt when these creatures were described by God. But what I want to do is kind of continue God's answer to Job and look at other creatures that may really seem strange and sometimes repulsive, terrorizing, wonderful, awesome. And these are creatures that we're still learning about. So I want to begin where God's answer concludes with Leviathan in the deep sea. And so these creatures come from the deep sea. And I'm going to continue playing the voice of God, which I sometimes relish. But I also want to say a shout out to the source that I drew from from which I drew these pictures. They're from Claire Nouvian's wonderful picture book called The Deep: The Extraordinary Creatures of the Abyss, published by the University of Chicago Press. And she is a journalist, a scientist, and an environmental activist who advocates on behalf of marine life. So here we go. Behold, Job, the dark watery depths, where my creatures great and small flourish in freedom. You call it chaos and death. I call it the womb of life. Behold, Job, the bottom of the deep dark sea, where countless life forms oblivious to the sun flourish under great pressure and in superheated water. Among them are my delicate tube worms that extend up to 10 feet in length amid large colonies of bacteria. Humans classify these creatures as extremophiles because they live in conditions that humans themselves cannot withstand. But Job, life began when Earth was ruled by extreme conditions. This wasn't Darwin's warm little pond. And you, Job, you're just a mesophile. Job, behold the enigmatic Grimpatothus. No, this is no anime cartoon character. Humans call it the Dumbo octopus. It simply rests on the bottom with its mantle spread around it. And Job, do you know what it does there sitting so still in the dark? Okay, then I'll let you in on a secret. It's meditating on Torah. And this little squid of mine, I'm going to let it shine. My jewel squid has the most sophisticated lighting system of any creature of the deep, complete with filters, reflectors, and eyelids, all of which allow it to regulate the duration and intensity of its luminosity. It can even vanish into the darkness if it so chooses. And Job, I'm sorry, but all you've got are fragile receptors, complete with blind spots. Behold the Pacific viperfish, with its long and pointy fangs that leave little chance of escape for its prey. Yet its teeth are so prominent that it has to put up with carrying them outside its mouth, dangerously close to its eyes. And if it miscalculates the size of its prey and impales an animal that is too big, it may find itself unable to swallow it or to spit it out, condemned therefore to die along with its last supper. But my favorite creature of the deep is the one that humans disparagingly call Vampiratothus infernalis. Too bad you don't know Latin, Job, for it means the vampire squid from hell. It was so named because it frightened the living daylights of its first discoverers. But it is my mascot of the deep, half squid, half octopus, dating back to 200 million years ago. This creature can do something that no other creature can. It can dwell quite happily in the oxygen-depleted layer of the ocean, and it can do so by its special respiratory blood pigment. And I am proud to say that my mascot is the slowest cephalopod of the sea. But Job, let's go back 375 million years ago, a mere twinkle of my eye, to another creature that humans call Tiktaalik rosé. It was recently discovered its fossils were recently discovered in the river sediments in the Arctic Circle. Humans have nicknamed it fishapod, for it provides the missing link between fish and tetrapod. But I, God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, I have a better name for it. I call it snout. Its story has been told by one of my favorite writers, next to Moses, Lorne Isley, from his book, The Immense Journey. Snout's story begins as such things always begin, in the ooze of unnoticed swamps, in the darkness of eclipsed moons, and it begins with a strangled gasping for air. On the oily surface of the pond, from time to time, a snout thrust upward. It took in air with a queer grunting inspiration and swirled back to the bottom. The pond was doomed, the water was foul, and the oxygen almost gone. But the creature would not die. It could breathe air directly through a little accessory lung, and it could walk. In all that weird and lifeless landscape, it was the only thing that could. It walked rarely and under protest, but that was not surprising. For Snout, this creature was a fish. And in the passage of days, the pond became a puddle, but the Snout survived. There was dew one dark night and a coolness in the empty stream bed, and when the sun rose the next morning, the pond was an empty place of cracked mud. But the Snout did not lie there. It had gone. Downstream there were other ponds, and it hobbled slowly along on the stumps of heavy fins. Behold, Job, the Snout. Even when the pond evaporates, it is not alarmed. It remains confident that it can breathe above the surface of the waters. And do not mock its face, Job, for in 375 million years, that face would be your own. So come back to the surface, Job, and gird up your loins. Take a deep breath, for every breath you take is shared by all air-breathing life on earth. Breathe, Job, take in the breath of life, and live anew, knowing that you have now found kinship with the children of the wild. And so, having beheld the beasts of the sea and the creatures of the primordial past, Job emerged slowly out of the watery depths, and he took a breath full and deep as if for the first time. And then he crawled back onto his ash heap, where he had suffered condemnation from his friends, banishment and detention from his community, and where he had once charged God with wrongdoing, bitterly awaiting his death. But now, amid the shocked silence of his friends, Job slowly lifted himself up, standing erect on his ash heap. And he prayed, not for himself, but for his friends who betrayed him. And then Job walked back home, ready to begin his new life, restored and transformed. Such is Job's journey from wound to wonder, from bewilderment to bewilding. And I look forward to talking with you about that journey as we continue.
Let's thank Bill for that wonderful presentation. I love that. So you did a similar thing in this book, Seven Pillars of Creation, because God says to Job, do you know about the lion and the ostrich and the wild ass, and it's like probably back, I mean, certainly back then, no, do you know when the mountain goat gives birth? But because of National Geographic, as you said, yeah, actually we do know, right, when the mountain goat gives. But I love how you now kind of translate that into these awesome, weird creatures of the deep. That's just
It was fun to do. And I've done this in the past, but I always tweak it. I usually add another creature, and I always learn something new.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
these creatures capture my sense of wonder.
Yeah.
And I think that was the aim of God, to instill in Job a sense of wonder.
Yeah.
which we can talk
I would
about.
agree. Yeah. We'll talk more about that. So here's the point at the of the evening where we dismiss Bill, and Alan Paget is going to host him for the online people. So those online, get ready with your questions. And the main course will be brought out here, and we have some questions. I think do we need one more slide? So we'll have a question on the slide. There we go. So what feelings all right, thank you, Bill. He'll come back in about 20 minutes. What feelings do these images of God's wild creatures elicit within you? And do you have a favorite of those, either from the book of Job or from those sea creatures? And perhaps if you have time around the table, describe an outdoor place in the wilderness or some place that comes to mind that instills awe and wonder in you at God's creation. So if you haven't had a chance to do this yet, please introduce yourselves around your table as you eat. The food will be brought out to you, and it'll be served family style. Introduce yourselves and then just engage in this conversation, please. Thank you. Enjoy.
So maybe I can take a privilege of being the host for this session and ask, why did you start at the end? I mean, like when we tell a story, and I guess there's a narrative arc to Job for sure, a dramatic arc. We usually start at the beginning, but you wanted us to start at the end, and I'm wondering, why did you do that? Where were you going with that? How are you setting us up to understand the book better?
So I think the ending of the book of Job is sort of it's the solution, it's the secret to the book of Job as a whole. Is this the conclusion? But I have found over the years in teaching the book of Job and listening to other people's understanding about the book of Job is that so many of us are fixated at the beginning, the first two chapters. Whereas it's the ending of the book of Job that should receive the most attention. And so it is sort of provocative of me perhaps to suggest that maybe we should read the book of Job with the ending in mind. And so so knowing something about the ending, of course, we haven't talked about the epilogue yet when Job is restored. But knowing God's answer to Job, and it is in God's answer that Job finds resolution, then why not use that as the starting basis for understanding the book of Job as a whole, even from the beginning? And so by focusing on the topic of creation, that compels readers to then look for creation, its themes, its references throughout the book, which we tend to dismiss because we're so engaged with, we're so fascinated with the Satan, and Job's suffering, and the friends in conflict with Job, and all of that are important parts of the book. But creation is the conclusion of the book. It is the solution of the book. It is the mystery of the book. So we should go back and read with creation in mind, as sort of an echo creation hermeneutical lens to see what comes of May. So some things that have jumped out at me in looking at the book as a whole through the lens of the ending is how some of these animals pop up earlier. Yeah. So for instance, in chapter 7, verse 12, Job says to God, "Why do you treat me like a dragon?" It's like that you set guard over me, that you contain me. So Job is already self-identifying with Leviathan, the Leviathan that is contained and slated for destruction that we find in other biblical literature. And then the onager, the wild ass.
Mm-hmm.
Job actually says some things about this wild ass before God ever talks about it. And his perception of the wild ass is this is a pathetic creature.
Mm.
And he likens the wild ass to the poor who are scavengers,
Ah,
and they eke out their existence in this very vulnerable condition, just like onagers in the desert. Um, and so he holds the onager like the poor from his limited perception in disdain. He has
right.
he has contempt for this animal as he has contempt for the poor. So, I mean, the whole problem with Job is that his perspective is very, very limited until God comes through and really shows him what the world is really like and all of
Mm.
its
Mm.
cosmic perspective. And so some of these animals actually show up before. And then I may talk more about this later. But in chapter 30, verse 29, Job laments, I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. And this is when he hits rock bottom in his
Right,
despair.
right.
And basically God is saying, actually, you're in good company with the
Yeah.
jackals and the ostriches. Let me tell you about them and how great they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So reading the book of Job and its convoluted plot and its tumultuous, turbulent rhetoric, particularly with the friends in Job. But to read all of that with creation in mind, then you see these certain elements of creation come to pass leading up to God's answer, which then turns Job's world inside out and outside in and upside down, where he begins to look at the world through the eyes of these creatures, whereas before he held them all in disdain. These were unclean animals. They were pathetic, or they are too dangerous to mess with, like Leviathan. Or he even sees himself punished by God as if he were Leviathan.
Hmm.
And God comes back and says, I don't punish Leviathan. I let Leviathan reign freely in the abyss. And Leviathan's a pretty cool creature. Let me tell you about it. So yeah, so that's my rationale for
Right.
focusing on the answer at the end of the book as a way of reading the book as a whole.
Right. So you have us focus on creation as a way of seeing and understanding the whole book all the way along.
Right.
So one of the questions that we've been asked though is about theodicy.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. Good.
so it's the question of suffering.
Yeah.
Technically, theodicy is a modern question, a modernist question.
Hmm.
And I like to think, you and I have had some science and engineering background. I like to think of it as until humans began to engineer their environment, they didn't ask the question, why didn't God engineer creation so that humans would be
Yeah.
better off? We wouldn't go through
Mm.
all this suffering. And
Yeah.
so that way of putting it is so typically modern.
Yeah.
But what about this whole question of God and the
Right.
sovereignty of God and the fact that God's created this vast and beautiful universe,
Yeah.
but then the human place in it seems to have this unjust. I mean, the
Right.
problem of Job is the problem of
Yeah.
unjust suffering of those who are innocent.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And so can you give us a little bit of retrospective
Yeah.
insight into we're looking at the beauty of creation, the wonderful and wildness
Right.
of it,
Yeah.
and then how does that come back? Or is that something you're going to tell us later?
Well, yeah.
Listen to it a little farther.
Right. Perhaps. The first thing to point out is that the book of Job does not give us a theodicy, partly because for the reasons you gave, Alan, is that
Mm.
that's a modern question in a way. Um, now, there's a lot of suffering in the book of Job, for sure. Job suffers a great deal. Job suffers horrifically. His suffering is almost unspeakable, as described in the first two chapters. And the original form of the book of Job probably was simply this, that Job suffered because God and the Satan instituted a test to see if Job would continue to fear God, revere God
Mhm.
for no reason. That is,
Right.
without any ulterior motive.
You have no blessings at the other side, eh?
Yeah, right. And what's missing in the oldest version of the book of Job is all of this dialogue between the friends and Job. That's what the Joban poet, a later editor, composer, sort of inserted to the book. And so the ending of the book of Job reflects the beginning of the book of Job. Job is restored. He passed his test. God confirms Job as having spoken rightly about God, whereas the friends who were full of accusing Job of this and that, they did not speak rightly about God, so God threatens to punish them. Job intervenes. They are saved, and Job is restored. And so that too doesn't really answer the question of suffering. In fact, it's sort of offensive in a way because the suffering of Job puts God in complicity with Job's suffering, as one student of mine once said, God in chapter 1 and 2 seems to be a betting man. And this wager with the Satan to see if and what gets Job into trouble at the beginning is that God boasts of Job. Look at my servant Job, a blameless and upright man is he, avoids evil, and that's when Hasatan, the Satan, then starts asking questions and casting suspicion about Job. And that launches the test. Job passes the test. Job is restored. And what the Joban poet does is insert all of this dialogue and including this cosmic creational perspective that we read about in God's answer at the end. So the Joban poet doesn't really address the issue of theodicy, but what the Joban poet does do is highlight two things. One is the social consequences of suffering, in which Job bitterly utters in despair how isolated he is, how alienated he is, and how much he is facing in terms of accusations from his friends. He is condemned as he sits on his ash heap. And there he is, sort of held in detention and condemned, blamed for his own suffering, which Job knows is not of his own fault. It is beyond his control. And he charges God with this travesty of justice, of this divine blunder. And so the Joban poet highlights this isolation and sense of almost persecution that he suffers from his friends and from the community. He is an outcast.
Yes.
And what the Joban poet addresses through God's speech is that as Job looks at the world through his own lens, he sees a world of chaos and destruction. He sees a God who is a destroyer, a terminator, if you will. And so that is Job's worldview as he sees the world through the lens of his own suffering. And so God comes in to correct that worldview, that actually the world is full of life and vitality. It does have its share of predation. Lions hunt their prey. So there is an admission that this is not a perfect world of peace and harmony, but it is a world of awe and wonder.
And wildness.
That's right. And wildness has its danger.
For humans too.
Right.
Not just for the animals.
Exactly. So what happens when God comes and presents the creation to Job in all of its wonder and awe, and Job feels comforted by that. Job feels resolved, even though God never addresses the issue of suffering per se. But what God does point out to Job is that the world is more than just suffering. Even if it's your own suffering, it's more than that. It's all about wonder and awe. And at the very end, if you want to really latch on to a theodicy response that centers around Job, then look no further than chapter 42, verse 11, if I recall, which reads, and Job's and the community and Job's family rallied around Job For the evil that the Lord committed against Job. That's the literal rendering. And they all provide some financial resource, golden ornaments and such, to sort of get Job back into the mode of restoration.
Mm.
It's sort of like an ancient GoFundMe page there at the end. And that's sort of the resolution of Job's predicament, is that he witnesses to God's um, presence and creation, and then the community rallies around him and begins to renew his life and bring him into a mode of restoration. And then Job acts differently as a result.
Yeah.
So does that answer theodicy? No, it does not.
No, it doesn't.
But it does give us a model of how to engage people who are suffering, I think.
Especially the suffering of the innocent, would you say? Or just
Yeah.
all kinds of suffering?
The suffering for sure of the innocent, because Job fits in that category.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, because of the tendency even today to blame the victim, and or simply to avoid anybody who is suffering for fear that we may end up suffering as well. So in other words, the tendency to isolate, to alienate, and to blame, still prevalent in the way sufferers are are encountered today. And the story of Job says no, that
Right.
you have to sit in solidarity as the friends did, and then after that everything went downhill, and to rally around and support and sustain those who do suffer. And I'm thinking about the current context as well. So I think you know, and I know, and most of us know that 70% of immigrants who have been detained under the Trump administration have no criminal record. Although it's said that the ICE raids
Right.
and all are for the hardened criminals.
Yeah, all the hardened criminals that are
Right.
immigrants.
Yeah, but
We're ignoring the hardened criminals that aren't immigrants.
So,
Yeah.
and yet
Ridiculous.
the innocent immigrants who are detained, arrested, they are treated as criminals. So the tendency to continue to blame them for crimes they have not committed.
Right.
And they are isolated from their families, ripped apart, and alienated, and basically defenseless. And Job fits that category as well.
Right.
He knows he's innocent. He protests. There is no advocate on his behalf. But ultimately he's restored and the community rallies around him.
Yeah.
So in a way, there's no theodicy at work, but there is how does one respond to the one who suffers, and particularly the one who suffers unjustly. That is Job's witness.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. So those early parts of Job seems to be, as a theologian, I want to say, this is just a setup for the story. You know what I mean? Like the Satan is not really a full-on Satan you get in Matthew's Gospels, just a stick figure almost.
Yes.
That is just there as a stock person to kind of get the whole thing going.
Right.
And I think the picture of God up in heaven too, and in the court and everything, that's just a stick figure of God. I wouldn't want to derive much of our understanding of God from that God. But the richness of the God who creates everything and it's wild, that it's beautiful, that it's powerful, and it's not subject to human whim and whimsy and even the human desire for comfort and ease and so forth.
Yeah, I could not have said that better, Alan.
That's beautifully said.
Yeah. Thank you for beautifully saying that.
I'm paraphrasing.
One analogy to kind of explore is that Job's character, beginning in chapter 3, when Job begins to protest and accuse God of wrongdoing, this is no longer Job the patient. This is no longer Job who simply accepts stoically his fate.
Right.
He begins to protest. And so Job's character has changed as if this new Job dismantles the old Job. And in the same way, then the God who is revealed at the end dismantles the
Ooh,
God that is presented in
that's
chapter 1 here.
nice.
Yeah,
So it's
thank
not
you.
Job who in the beginning he says famously, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh
Take it,
away.
right,
Blessed is the,
right.
but rather Job matures in his faith and he
Yeah, okay,
recognizes,
right.
there that I can protest against God.
Right. That's what lament is all about. You get
Yeah,
that in the Psalms as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah. So the new Job and the new God are revealed
yeah,
at the end of the
yeah,
book.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great reason to start at the end. Thank you for talking to us about. Really, I mean, I could talk to you for a long time, but maybe we'll uh I wonder what you think about the place though of Job in our understanding of Christian ministry today and in our
Mhm.
understanding of
Yeah.
where the suffering comes from. So in one of the interesting things that
Yeah.
happens to Job is although God has done this bad thing, God takes away protections in the book of Job and allows bad things to come in. Like you
Right.
think of there's the earthquake and there's illness,
Yeah.
and these other things that are almost like the natural world is allowed to attack Job a little bit. Not the wandering areas. Like I'll give you that. That's the human part, and that's there, but
Yeah.
it's almost like God lets the powers of creation have
Yeah.
their way
Yeah.
with
You
him.
know, this reminds me of your dear colleague and my kind of sort of a mentor in many ways, Terry Fredheim, who talks about God's relationship with the world is not that of a micromanager. God
Right,
is not controlling this and that.
right.
God lets creation be and all of its conflicting powers. And yeah, and we get caught up in that. Life
We
gets
do.
caught up in that.
Life
Life
does.
is vulnerable.
It
Um,
is, and it's supposed to be that way.
yeah,
It's made to be that way
right,
because we are
right.
part of the world.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so great.
Okay, I
I
look
can't
forward
wait
to,
for the next time.
yeah, I look forward to it as
So
well.
we'll learn more
Thank you
wisdom
for
from
these
you and come back
questions.
for
You
more
know, there are many
discussion.
more.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I look forward to more. Thanks again, Bill.
Thanks, Alan.
Really great.
We'll be
See you
back.
soon. Yeah,
Yeah.
see you soon.
So Bill had the chance to talk to the folks online, and now we're going to engage in some conversation here.
Yeah.
So Bill, we're putting him through the ringer here. He doesn't have any downtime tonight, but he did eat before we started. So just so you know, we did feed him. So you alluded to this in the slides that you showed, Bill. The whirlwind speeches, the God speeches at the end of the book, come after several chapters. In fact, 37 chapters of the book of Job happen before the whirlwind speeches, and these are probably the part of the book that most people know when they think about the book of Job, right? The wager with the Satan, God's wager with the Satan, and all the suffering that comes upon Job and those three so-called friends, as you said. So here's the question to begin with: how do you read? How does one read the book of Job as a whole in light of God's answer to Job at the end? Because a lot of people, both lay people, many people who read the book of Job and get to the whirlwind speeches say things like, what in the world, right? What does this have to do with the first 37 chapters and the suffering that Job experienced? So how would you respond to the?
First, I'd be interested to know if anybody has ever preached from the book of Job that focused on God's answer to Job.
I have.
Oh, yes.
And Steve has.
Oh, maybe
Yeah,
one or
yeah,
two. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Because I think the tendency is to preach from the first two chapters and to celebrate the kind of Joban character of accepting what God throws at Job through the means of Hasatan, and just to focus on Job's character. But we rarely, I think, reflect on the ending when God really comes through in the whirlwind to talk about creation. And particularly, I would think, to talk about the animals. And so my next question would be, who has ever preached about the animals in the book of Job? Uh, Diane Jacobson, of course you have. Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. Um, and but I haven't done it yet. But I love to teach about it. And that is supposed to be the climax and the conclusion of the book, if you bracket the restoration epilogue. And so if that is God's um, answer, God finally showing up to Job and saying something that seems to be significant, why do we disregard it when we read the book of Job as a whole? So I'm provocatively suggesting read the book of Job beginning with the ending. And that may be that's not quite like if you're reading a mystery novel and you flip to the very end to see the solution, and then you go back and see, aha, now I understand. It's sort of like that, though. Yeah. So when you read the book of Job as a whole through the lens of what God says to Job about the universe, the cosmos, and the animals, then you go back and you start picking up certain details about creation that gets batted about between Job and Job's friends. For instance, in chapter 12, chapter 12, I think it's verse 7, where in response to, I think it's Bildad who says, inquire of bygone years, uh, learn from the sages who have come before us, learn from tradition. They're in the know. They know exactly what's going on with you, Job. Well, which means that Job sinned and he deserves this punishment and the like. And you know how Job responds? I know you know how Job
That's okay.
responds. Job says, ask the animals, and they will tell you.
Yeah.
They will tell you what the Lord has done. They know what God has done. And so, as the friends appeal to what Job considers to be the tyranny of tradition, Job appeals to creation already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although he doesn't fully understand creation until the end when God comes through. And what's also ironic is back in chapter 7, I think it's verse 12, Job asks God, why do you treat me like a dragon? That you set a guard over against me.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, Job is already self-identifying as Leviathan, but the Leviathan that is slated for destruction, as we find in Isaiah and elsewhere, this evil sea monster. And Job is saying, you're treating me like a sea monster. Why? What have I ever done against you, O God, that would warrant such punishment and suffering? And my favorite, though, is the onager, the wild ass, which I read the description of in chapter 39. And so earlier, Job has this idea of the wild ass. He talks about the wild ass as a fitting metaphor for the impoverished who are eking out their existence, scavenging the earth like wild asses. And that deserves his pity.
Mm-hmm.
And later, he sort of castigates the poor because now he is cast out among the outcasts. And he talks, now they sport with me, they spit on me, and they are a disreputable brood. They bray like donkeys, like wild asses. And so he holds the onager in contempt as a metaphor for those whom he holds contempt against. Fellow outcasts, if you will. And then God shows up and says, behold the onager. It is free and fierce, and and the salt lands are its home. And it looks to the city, it scorns the tumult of the city, and hears the slave driver.
It doesn't hear the shout of the driver.
Doesn't hear this. Yeah. And so what God is doing is altering Job's perception so that he begins to see the world through the eyes of these wild animals, or at least as God sees these wild animals, as as almost God's children. It's almost as if God says to Job, "Here," and God pulls out a wallet with all these pictures, like I would do with my two daughters. Look at my daughters. I have keep pictures of them in my wallet, but God pulls out God's wallet. I know it's a masculine imagery, and I'm sorry about that, but it's like God is proud of God's children, and here are God's children, and they are these wild creatures from lion to the Leviathan, and so Job has to begin to see the world through their eyes. You know, in a way, um, it's interesting comparing what happens to Job at the end of the book with what goes on in the Garden of Eden. You know, there are animals in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, when God says about Adam, it is not good for Adam to be alone.
Hmm.
So what does God do? God creates animals from the ground. That's Plan A, and and presents them to Adam. And what does Adam do? He names them as he searches for a partner.
Yeah.
He doesn't find a partner, but in the process, he names every animal. And so, in a way, Adam defines the relationships between him and the animals. Now, jump to Job. That sounds cool. Jump to Job.
Yep, to do.
And what happens is just the opposite. Through the power of divine poetry, Job is transported to learn about the habits and habitats of these wild creatures. He doesn't name them. God names them. And perhaps for some of these animals, Job learns their names for the first time. So in a way, Job is sort of the anti-Adam in that respect. The animals don't come to Job. He goes to the animals.
Yeah.
And learns about them in their natural habits and habitats.
Yeah, that's lovely. And God seems to take special delight exactly in the wild and right, the wildest animals, the wildest places
Right.
that aren't usable by human beings,
Yeah.
like this wilderness.
And really, what sort of establishes this bond between Job and what God presents about the wildness of creatures. When Job hits rock bottom in chapter 30, he says, "Now I'm a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches."
Yeah.
And those two creatures are really interesting because elsewhere, particularly in prophetic poetry, those two creatures, jackals and ostriches, they are the wild animals that repopulate a devastated city, a city that's been invaded, destroyed, laid in ruins, survivors either deported or killed or both. And what happens next? Then the wild animals come and start repopulating the city. And in biblical poetry, it's the ostriches and the jackals who do that.
Yeah.
And so when Job says, "I am a companion of ostriches and a brother of jackals," he is saying, I feel like I am a besieged city.
Mm.
My life is in ruins. My family has abandoned me, and my friends accuse me of all manner of evil. I am condemned in their eyes. I am sitting on my ash heap, like sort of in detention. And I feel besieged. And now I have these wild creatures who are wandering around in my life. And so that's the way he expresses his despair.
Yeah.
And with a hint of protest. But when God shows up and talks about the ostriches, for some reason the jackals aren't mentioned.
Yeah.
But maybe they should be. God is saying, Job, welcome to the wild.
Yeah.
You're actually in good company.
Yeah.
With the wild.
Yeah.
They're your new community.
I like that.
Yeah.
The companion to ostriches. Job thinks of it as a bad thing, and God says, no, actually,
Right,
they're beautiful.
right.
So here's the question that I assume at least some of the people in the room are asking. So thinking, maybe. So usually when people think about Job, the book of Job and the character of Job, they think about suffering. And you alluded to that already, right? That that Job is in the depths of despair, comparing himself to a besieged city. So what in the world do these whirlwind speeches have to do
Yeah.
with suffering?
Right. So this question was also sort of posed in the online conversation, and and when Alan and I were talking about that, we both acknowledged that the Book of Job does not give us a theodicy,
Yeah.
does not give us an explanation of suffering. This is one example, and Job is not sort of an everyman kind of character. Job is unique in many ways. And so there's a lot of irony in the book of Job. So the greatest man of the East, the wealthiest, the most righteous man of the East, he experiences as a downfall. So moving from being the richest man to an outcast, and with the death of his children and suffering from bodily illness through the sort of bet between the Satan and God. It's a horrific story.
Yeah.
That's what we're so fascinated with. We want to know about the character of Hasatan and who is this God who is complicit in Job's own suffering? And
Mhm.
why is this test so important? Does Job fear God for nothing?
Mhm.
That is, without any ulterior motive. And so Job is not meant to represent every person in one's suffering. This is a unique story about a unique character. And the narrative arc is, yes, between Job's suffering at the beginning and Job's restoration at the end. And so Job is relieved from his suffering for sure. And that's the arc of the oldest form of the story, the sort of the folkloric form of the story, without all of that poetry and conversation between the friends and Job in between. Those the majority of those 37 chapters you referred to.
Mhm.
So what the Joban poet adds to the story is not an answer to suffering. No. But I think what the Joban poet does is add to how we should respond to someone who does suffer. And so there are two things that the Joban poet emphasizes thematically. One is the social isolation, alienation, and the tendency to blame the victim, which is exactly what the friends do with
Yeah.
Job.
Yeah.
They start off nice. They sit with Job for 7 days and 7 nights. That's the best thing they did.
Yep.
Everything goes downhill after that.
Yep. They open their mouth and
They open their
everything goes
mouth.
to hell.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. They sort of stayed silent.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
The solidarity of silence.
Yeah.
And they end up they start diplomatically and they praise Job, but in the end, they accuse him of all manner of evil. Job knows he's innocent. And so he is an innocent victim of really moral persecution.
Yeah.
As many of us know, and this was talked about in the online, I do find this parallel with what's going on with our immigrant communities today, with the ICE raids and such. We know that 70% of those who are arrested and detained are innocent of any crime.
Yeah.
And yet we're treating them as if they were criminals. And so the friends treat Job as if he were a criminal.
Yeah.
And there he is in detention on his ash heap, besieged from his, as he himself admits, with these ostriches and jackals. And he looks on the world. He looks around the world through the crucible of his own suffering, and he sees the world full of chaos and destruction. He thinks of God as a destroyer, as a terminator, and that, in his own words, God is gnashing me in God's teeth. God has set me up for target practice unjustly. This is a travesty of justice. And so Job wants to drag God into court. Job issues his own lawsuit against God. And so God comes, but not in a courtroom, but in a whirlwind. And what God does is show Job that the world is not all chaotic. It is all not destructive. And God is not a destroyer, but God is a sustainer. And that God is giving creation its freedom to thrive and flourish, each in its own way with these wild creatures. And so what God does doesn't resolve the issue of suffering, but God changes Job's perception of the world so that he is no longer seeing the world through the crucible of his own agony, but rather to God's perspective and through the perspective of these animals that are flourishing. There is predation. I mean, lions do hunt their prey, so there is
Right.
violence
Yeah,
in
yeah.
creation. Uh, but primarily, it is a world of the living,
Mm.
of vitality and flourishing. And if you want a more specific response, then look no further than chapter 42, verse 11, where when God has had God say, and Job has prayed for his friends, and then what happens next is a beautiful thing. It's only in one verse, but we tend to miss it. The community rallies around Job and they contribute to Job's finances
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with gold, maybe gold earrings, I forget, um, and um, and to help restore Job. That begins Job's restoration. It's when the community rallies around Job, not God single-handedly restoring Job. And so I think the narrator and the poet together emphasize that to to the way to relate to a sufferer is to be in solidarity and to fight against the tendency to isolate and to alienate and to blame, um, but to help restore and to provide that solidarity of, Walter Brueggemann defined chesed um, as tenacious solidarity with
I
others.
like that. Yeah.
And so in a way, the community is finally practicing chesed towards Job. The word isn't actually used, but I think it can be for sure.
Tenacious solidarity.
Tenacious solidarity.
Yeah.
That's
So-
how the friends started.
Yeah,
Then
yeah,
the
yeah.
poet,
Right. Yeah,
and then the community fulfills that at the end for Job,
yeah,
and that begins his journey of restoration.
yeah. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. So no kind of final answer, no theodicy,
Right.
but an invitation into community,
Exactly.
both the community of those who help
Mhm.
with Job's restoration, but also the community of the creation.
And that too, yeah. So in other words, Job finds a new connection with creation and with these wild creatures,
Yeah.
which we can talk more about
Yeah,
later.
we'll talk that in
Yeah.
part 3. That's
Right.
beautiful. Thank you so much, Bill. So Bill's going to go back to the online folks. Feel free to keep eating, by the way, even while we're discussing. I think dessert is on its way out. And we have another question or two, I think, if you want to put that up. So thank you, Bill. We'll send you off to keep working. So a couple of questions here. Whatever you may or may not have time to do both of these, but how do you think Job felt after encountering God and creation in the whirlwind speeches? And what's the tone in which you hear God's voice in the whirlwind speeches? Are the speeches confrontational, invitational, or something else? And this is we didn't quite get to this in chapter 42, but some translations of Job 42:6 say that Job despises himself and repents on dust and ashes. And Bill and I both agree that's a terrible translation, by the way, of the Hebrew. The Common English Bible actually has a better translation that Job is comforted about on dust and ashes. But do you think did Job have to repent of anything after his encounter with God? What do you think has changed within him? So either or both of those questions, and dessert will come out as we talk for about 20 minutes. Thanks.
Well, welcome back.
Good to be back, Alan.
Yeah, thank you. It's been ages, my friend.
I missed you so.
Yeah, I did. I really appreciate again just the wisdom of this conversation that you've had with Dr. Schifferdecker. So deep, so many cool questions, and
Sure.
maybe just to come back to some of the things we were talking about. uh, one of the things you mentioned earlier was one of this great Jewish biblical scholar,
Okay.
Zvet,
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
that
yeah.
in Job you get the Bible like against the Bible.
Right, right, right.
And do you think that has specifically to do with this idea that in something like Deuteronomy, where you know, because you break the covenant and you're idolatrous and you're not faithful, then you have all these curses.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
the other way you
exactly.
have blessings.
Right.
When you
Right.
fear the Lord, that is
Yeah.
to say you listen to Torah and you follow
Right.
it and you worship the Lord, then you'll have these blessings. And so, um,
Yeah.
why does it seems like so many Christians still think
Mm.
the first way, even though the Bible itself is
Mhm.
it's kind of, I don't know how I'll let you answer that, but you know what I'm trying to say is there's this idea that the whole Bible doesn't say exactly the same thing,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that we need to read it as a whole book
Yeah, yeah.
with as Christians, you know, with Christ kind of
Okay.
giving us the key. But
Right, right.
yeah, and that this idea still persists that if people suffer because somewhere or other, so they've done some sin or some evil.
Yeah, and Jesus actually addresses that when recounting a catastrophe when a tower fell. And he asks, did these people sin? And this is
Hmm.
why this happened? So in a way, he's following the tradition of Job that really severs the assumed connection between righteousness and blessing and the converse of that of disobedience and curse. Um,
Yeah.
and so Job is lifted up, and this is why I think Job is incorporated into the canon because it offers a very different view of the morality of the universe. That it does not operate in a retributive way, as assumed in
Hmm.
Deuteronomy and
Hmm.
in some of Proverbs as well.
Hmm.
Um, but that there's a more freedom um, to the universe that God lets the creation develop and be in conflict with the variety of forces involved and of course creatures and life forms and whether it's tectonic plates or
Right.
volcanoes or
Right.
earthquakes as well as yeah, wicked people who are
Wicked people too,
who
yes.
succeed. And that's one of Job's own protests is why do the wicked prosper? And he's just the opposite of wicked, as he sees himself. He's the most he used to be the most blessed person on the planet, if you will. And
Hmm.
he's the one whose life is turned upside down and suffers the most horrendous forms of suffering imaginable, whether it's the death of family and bodily disease.
Yeah.
And it's like the story is, as you said before, it is a setup to illustrate
Yeah.
that that connection just does not exist.
Yeah.
That God
Not
does
in the
not
real
operate
world.
in that way.
Right.
Um, and invoking Terry Fretheim again, the creation is sort of left in its freedom, and that God, in some broad way, sustains life and the like. But it's really up to us humans to embody the love that we receive from God in
Hmm.
Christ, the love of Chesed in the Old Testament, and to show that to others, and to, as I said, with the in-person group, that uh, we are to show loving kindness
Hmm.
to others. It's what God
Right.
expects of us,
Right.
and that counters and that is the faithful response to those who do suffer.
Hmm.
Um, and we sustain.
Hmm.
We're in tenacious solidarity with those who suffer. So I think that's as far as Job gets to. But to kind
Hmm.
of delve deeper into what your question assumes
Yes.
that we just have to acknowledge that the Bible speaks in different voices.
Oh, yeah.
It is
Yeah.
it is a polyphonic text,
Yes.
as one of my biblical colleagues and mentors used to say, not just for the Bible, but particularly for Job. Job itself is a polyphonic text. It has so many different voices. There's Job's perspective, there's the narrator's perspective, there's the friend's perspective, there's God's perspective, all sort of intertwined, which makes Job, in a way, sort of an indeterminate book. It is designed to raise questions. In fact, I think the sages responsible for the book of Job would be proud of what we're doing in posing questions and discussing, because even the book of Job does not answer every question. It doesn't answer the question of the problem of evil, for instance, but it is up to us to continue to talk about that and how we respond to evil. That's what Job is most concerned about, is how is our response to evil and suffering.
Right. And so I think, the Bible itself is a polyphonic book, is one of the things you're saying too, as well as the book of Job. And so
I can make a book plug here, in that I have a recent book called Sacred Tension, Embracing Dissonance and Dialogue in the Old Testament, published by Upper Room. And
yay!
That's yours.
That is.
And what I do is I look at common themes and show how the Bible speaks in different perspectives. Such as our place in creation, the nature of evil, what is wisdom, where does it come from? The notion of election is hotly debated in the book. I'm reminded of a Jewish colleague who said that the Bible is really a debate book.
Just a quick announcement. There's coffee available on the table near the entrance, so please feel free to help.
Dialoguing. It's a dialogical book, and it's that's what is involved to be. It's what's involved in being a faithful and critical reader of Scripture. And so the good, the bad, and the ugly are all there in the Bible. And as critical readers, we are invited to discern between all of that and to sort out what is particularly appropriate for us Christians, with Christ as the key, as you said, Alan.
Yeah, it's really an old idea. Those early Christian thinkers, they knew the Bible really well. They knew there was this diversity, and it just kept insisting that. Like, one of the metaphors I really like was that the four gospels are the first fruits of the Bible. So it's like, if you're going to start to read, how you say, go to the end of the book of Job, and you'll understand the rest better. And if you read the four gospels, origins point is you understand the whole Bible better. You see it through that. But there is an amazing diversity in Scripture.
Four gospels.
Not just one.
Not just one, four gospels. And as I count up, 7 creation traditions in the Old Testament.
That's quite a few.
3 just in the first 3 chapters of 2 in the first 3 chapters of Genesis.
No, that's true. And we sometimes forget that the Bible doesn't stop talking about creation once Genesis 4 gets here. There's actually a lot about that.
I'll just say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and dialogue.
Then he created humans and still wondering why that happened. Okay, so there's been several questions about preaching, and I want to pay attention to that. So one is, do you think that this message that you're suggesting, about the humility of the human species relative to all the wild animals, and the fact that humans, in the book of Job, we're hearing this refrain that we are created to be with the animals, and the animals in their wildness can show us, the freedom of life in the midst of the world that God has made, which does sometimes lead to suffering or even to death, but that nevertheless it is still a beautiful, wild, amazing world. So do you think that is a preachable message? Can you see that being preached from the book of Job?
Yes. That very question demonstrates to me that the book of Job is perhaps the most ecological text in the Bible, which is maybe shocking to say, because I spent so many years studying Genesis 1. It was my dissertation. And I love Genesis 1. And it took me a few years to get beyond Genesis 1 after that dissertation. But I
Mm.
moved on to Job. And the very fact that God concludes God's address to Job with this loving description of creation full of admiration, if not pride. It's like God is a proud parent of creation and these wild creatures. And that's what concludes
Mm.
God's answer
Mm.
to Job.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so and the picture that God paints of creation again is full of vitality and life and freedom and fearlessness. These creatures are fearless. The ostrich laughs at the horse and rider. The war horse laughs um, as it engages, charges into battle. It's the fierceness of these creatures.
Yeah.
And the trick is, I think this is maybe the preachable point,
Okay.
is that Job comes to discover his connection with these creatures. So when God says to Job, "Behold, Behemoth, which I made with you,"
Mm-hmm.
this is
That's
the
your translation, emphasis and
that's the
translation.
literal Hebrew.
Right, but I'm saying
Yeah,
you're not going
yeah.
to find that in the NRSVUE.
Right. It's like as I behold Behemoth, which I made, um, just as I made you, or something like that.
Right.
But there's that with, that one word, that preposition with,
Mm.
suggests that there's a bond between Job and Behemoth, this monstrous creature that Job begins to discern his own identity through.
Right.
And uh, I tried to kind of present that in the images I presented. It would
Yeah.
remember snout.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so Behemoth is praised for its fearlessness. It is not frightened when the Jordan River rushes against its mouth. And snout is not frightened when the pond dries up because it knows it can breathe anyway. And I'm going to make the
Good
point
point.
that Job is not frightened when his friends launch accusation and accusation against him.
Oh,
He continues to persist in his integrity and protest his innocence. And God celebrates that. And God shows Job, guess what? These creatures are doing the same thing.
hmm
You are part of the wild. And so, in a broader, perhaps more philosophical way, what God does with Job is break the binary between man and animal.
The false division
A false division,
between
literally.
man and the rest of creation and
Right.
animals.
That we
Okay,
are
great,
we are
great.
we are we are animals too. And
Absolutely
we
right.
we are created to be wild, which doesn't mean being reckless or careless. It
No,
means the
not like what the street
flourishing,
people say, wow.
right, to flourish, to be vital,
Vibrant, alive,
vibrant,
fully
alive,
alive.
fully
Yeah,
alive.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
thank
yeah.
you, thank you.
That's
Just
beautiful.
like
That's
these
beautiful.
animals. Yeah.
Well, this is great. So I look forward to one more session with
One
you. We're
more.
gonna have to let you
Okay.
go back to
All right. Yeah.
the in-person group for now, but we'll
Yeah.
see you soon then.
Very good.
Thanks
Thanks, Alan.
again.
All right.
So this is part 3, which we titled Wonder and Creation. So wonder, WONDER, not wonder as in travel around, but wonder as in awe, is a theme that comes up in a lot of your work. So including in this book, Seven Pillars of Creation, you write a lot about wonder, and one of your books is actually called Wisdom's Wonder, which is lovely, about the wisdom literature of the Bible. So what does and the title of your lecture, of course, is Bewildered by Wonder. So
Yeah.
what does wonder have to do with your interpretation of the book of Job?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I've been waiting for this question, Catherine.
All right,
And
good.
so here we go. Here we go. I'd like to begin with what psychologists have to say about wonder or awe. And there's one psychologist by the name of Paul Piff, P-I-F-F, who's done research on wonder and our response to wonder or awe. And he defines wonder as an emotion that sort of is there on the boundary between pleasure and pain.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. But he says, in terms of an experience of wonder, there has to be two qualities. One is an experience of vastness, bigness, immensity, enormity, or complexity. And that experience of vastness has to shake you to your core. That is, it's something that you can't wrap your head around, but it sort of it presents cognitive dissonance. Although I like one of my favorite ethicists is named Lisa Sedaris, and she talks about cognitive crucifixion. And so it's something that really questions how you think about the world, how you think about yourself. And so those are the two qualities of wonder or awe. Is this an experience of vastness, like the vastness of creation, or a threatening experience of awe that puts you in danger, like being in a thunderstorm, or a storm on the high seas. And if you survive that, then you're changed, you're transformed, is part of his point.
Yeah.
And what has been measured is what happens after you experience that. And he has found, among with others, is that there's a tendency to what is called pro-social behavior.
Pro-social behavior.
Yeah, that
Okay.
means doing something good in the world,
Ah,
exercising generosity or altruism.
Hmm.
And so they've set up, he and his crew set up these experiments where their subjects would experience something awesome and either positive or negative, something threatening or positive, like seeing vistas of the Grand Canyon, and then seeing if there's a tendency towards a pro-social behavior. So they play this sort of economic game in which you choose to withhold money or give money away. And those who have experienced an experience of wonder tend to give their money away.
that's fascinating.
Yeah, pro-social behavior.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And so my point is that Job experiences awe. First of all, the vastness of the universe. And that's the way God begins God's answer, by taking Job to the heights and depths of creation, the dwelling place of light, the gates of death, and the earth's foundations and the morning stars singing for joy. That's all about the vastness of creation.
Hmm.
But then God talks about the animals. And the animals are key to this, because Job bears witness to these animals thriving. They're filled with vitality, and he finds a connection with these animals. So when God says to Job, "Behold Behemoth," or in my translation, "Voila, Behemoth," which I made with you. That one word, that preposition, can say so much.
Yeah.
Does that mean that there's a bond between Job and this monster? Is there something in common that Job and Behemoth share? Well, obviously they're both creatures of God,
Yeah.
so they share creaturehood before God, but there may be something more as well. Behemoth is celebrated for its fearlessness. When the river rushes against his mouth, it's not frightened. And Job has not been frightened when his friends accuse him of all manner of evil. He protests, he persists in integrity. He has this certain courage about him, and audacity, or what we might say, chutzpah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Job embodies chutzpah, calling God to account. And God in the end, I think, affirms that for Job. Just like Behemoth, with the rushing waters against his mouth, so Job continues to speak and protest his innocence courageously before his friends and before God, whom he sees to be as a destroyer.
Yeah.
So And so where does that pro-social behavior come from? Well, it comes from the sense of wonder. How is it embodied by Job? I'm glad you asked that question.
All right.
That's where the epilogue is so important. So the epilogue sounds a lot like the prologue, the first two chapters and chapter 42, beginning with verse 7. Comparing the two reminds me of those old comic strips in the Sunday paper, where there would be brain teasers, and part of this brain teasing would be to display two panels that look almost identical.
Mm.
And your challenge is to pick out the differences between the two.
Yeah, right.
And you really have to look and find the differences. In a way, the prologue and the epilogue function in the same way. I mean, some scholars have disparagingly referred to the epilogue as there's your Hollywood happy ending to the book of Job.
Because everything is restored.
Everything's
He
restored.
has 10 more children.
10 more children, 7
Yeah.
sons, 3 daughters.
Yeah, yeah,
It almost sounds the very same thing
yeah.
as in the beginning. But what is different is Job.
Yeah.
And what Job does is something outrageously unpatriarchal. He's the embodiment of patriarchy in chapters 1 and 2. He's the upright and uptight patriarch, always sacrificing on behalf of his children out of fear. Now, Job, what we read about Job, his only act is that he lavishes his inheritance upon his daughters.
Yeah.
Which is not biblical.
No.
Yeah, of course, the sons get the inheritance. The firstborn gets a double portion of the inheritance.
Right.
But now we have Job giving his inheritance to his daughters, or at least including his daughters in his wealth extended to the whole family. And so Job is different. That's his pro-social behavior, which breaks certain norms of inheritance.
So he's transformed.
He's transformed. And he is what my dear colleague Mitzi Smith considers, he's the first one in the Bible to perform gender justice.
Oh, yeah, I like that. I like that.
Ensuring that his daughters don't have to marry outside the family for economic survival.
Yeah.
That they become financially independent. And so they have the choice themselves. Gender justice in the book of Job, thanks to Job's pro-social behavior.
After his experience of wonder. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
All right, so your the title that you gave your lecture is Bewildered by Wonder, Just Creation in the Book of Job. So I've heard of rewilding, which is when you reestablish a wild population of wild animals in a particular location.
Right.
What do you mean by bewildered?
Yeah, so that's my wordplay of bewilderment and bewilding. So Job is bewildered. He's bewildered by his suffering. He doesn't know where it has come from and what to do about it. So he's bewildered in that respect. And then he's bewildered, I think, by God's answer to Job. God does not come to Job to answer Job's questions. God comes to Job to show Job what creation is really like beyond his own understanding. So there's a bewildering there. It's again what our psychologists refer to as cognitive dissonance or cognitive crucifixion. So that's the bewildering.
Yeah.
But when God tells Job, look at Behemoth, which I made with you, which could be translated, be whom I made to be with you. That witness, that connection, that bond, Job begins to discern his own connection to the wild, beginning with Behemoth, this monster. And by extension, then Job finds a connection, I think, with all the creatures of the wild. There's something that he begins to see in himself in these creatures, their fearlessness, their courage, their unquenchable thirst for life. Now, Job began back in chapter 3 with a death wish.
Yeah.
But as the friends engaged Job and began accusing Job, then you can just feel Job's anger rise, and he wants to prove the friends wrong. So he begins to muster his strength, his mental facilities, his stamina in order to defend himself. It's sort of forced upon him, but he also begins to welcome that challenge. And he's the last man standing when it comes to engaging debate
Mhm.
in a way, with the exception of Elihu comes later.
Yeah, we won't talk about
Yeah,
that.
Elihu. Yeah. Actually, I see Elihu, he's disparaged a lot. He's this young upstart who comes as the fourth interlocutor. He comes out of nowhere. Um, and he's a young guy. He's full of arrogance, and he condemns not only Job but also his friends for not
Right,
answering why.
right.
But he also serves as the warm-up band to God.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah, because
that is.
he says at one point,
Yeah.
consider the wondrous works of God,
Yeah.
and talks about God's power and what God does in creation. And that leads to then God to show up in creation in
Yeah.
the form of the whirlwind.
Yeah.
So where were we going on that? Bewilding, yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So in other words, I think the point of these animals is that Job discerns a kinship.
Yeah.
He discerns a substantial kinship with the creatures of the wild, and he sees himself, maybe retrospectively now, as sort of a wild patriarch who is now willing to break certain customs of patriarchy as he is restored.
Yeah.
So in a way, he brings a certain wildness he carries a certain wildness with him as he re-enters into domestic home life in this patriarchal household. Yes, he is a patriarch, but he acts in such an unpatriarchal way. And so the narrator says at the end that he lived 140 more years full of days. And what does that mean? It's like the narrator is asking you to kind of fill in, how else did Job live his life, beginning with sharing his inheritance freely with his daughters, who are named.
Yeah. The names are
Names of the daughters.
kind of wild names.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
cinnamon stick, dove,
Yeah.
rouge pot, or
Exactly.
yeah, horn of eyeshadow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of sensual names.
Sensual names.
Yeah.
And the poor sons, they're never named.
The sons, they get
Yeah.
passed over. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the focus is on the daughters.
Yes. And they're the most beautiful women in the land.
That's right.
The daughters of Job.
Right.
So let me ask you, so Job feels this kinship now, and learns how to live in a kind of wild way, or
Okay,
to
yeah.
parent in a
Mhm.
in a way that he wasn't at the beginning of the book. So this focus on wilderness is in the whirlwind speeches is somewhat unique in scripture. I mean, Psalm 104 talks about the
Good.
wild animals and Leviathan too. But it seems to me, and it seemed to me for a long time, that these whirlwind speeches are particularly pertinent for our day and age, right? When we know our effect on creation, human beings' effect, climate change, pollution, mountaintop removal, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So what does the book of Job, and particularly this creation theology of the whirlwind speeches, what does it have to teach us in our day and age about so this is the Rutlen Lecture on Faith and Creation. So what does it teach us about our responsibility, or our place, maybe is a better way to put it?
I have just sort of one statement to unpack, and I would say that the responsibility of the beloved community is to care for the biotic community.
Oh, yeah.
The church is the beloved community, but the beloved community, to be beloved, has to extend its love and care to also the biotic community.
Yeah, that's nice.
And Job's perception of the wild is now very different. Whereas he saw the wild, the wilderness, as a place of chaos and danger and contempt, uncleanliness. I mean, some of these animals are just unclean.
Yeah.
And now he is one of them.
Yeah, right.
He
He's cast out, he's leprous, or
yeah, right.
yeah.
He's cast out and living on the periphery as these animals living in the wilderness. That's by definition the periphery. And speaking of the landscape, one of my favorite texts in God's answer doesn't have to do with the animals. It's when God talks about the desert, and God says something like in chapter 39, I think, that God cuts a channel for the torrent of rains to water the wastelands
Yeah.
and the desert
Yeah.
and to make grass grow.
Yeah.
To tell Job that what you consider to be a wasteland,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
literally a no man's land,
Yeah. Yeah. That's what he says. Yeah.
is full of life. God takes care of the wilderness. God's sovereignty and love extends to the wilderness as well.
Yeah.
And so should we.
Yeah.
And so should we. Yeah.
A particularly relevant word for us today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all about the dynamic of bewilding. We are meant to be bewildered. And just a short shout out to one of my favorite scientific heroes who recently passed away, Franz de Waal, who was a primatologist who basically made the argument just by observing our evolutionary cousins, primates, particularly chimpanzees, that chimpanzees exhibit empathy, fairness, reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And he documented that. He also had this famous experiment where he had two monkeys who were rewarded by doing certain tasks. And whenever they performed a task successfully, one of them would get a grape. The other one would get a slice of cucumber. And after the second time this was happening, the monkey that received the cucumber threw the cucumber back at the experimenter and shook the cage, enraged, demonstrated that there was a sense of fairness being violated here. And whenever you can go TED Talk, Franz de Waal, WAAL, it's a famous experiment. And when I saw him show this on video, we all laughed like we all did. And he asked, "Why do you laugh?" And then he answered his own question. He said, "Because you see yourself there."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Animals, he wrote another book called something like, Do We Think We Know? Something like, it was about animal intelligence, that animals are smarter than we think they are. And he goes through different species about their own intelligences and their own moral behavior. He discovered morality in non-human animals.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and so we are kin, not only by our DNA, not only by our genetics, but we are also kin in many respects to our moral dispositions and emotions.
Yeah.
And to recognize that enlarges our community. Our community is not just human beings in various forms of community, but also including the community of other life forms, of all living beings. And so the biotic community should be part of the beloved community. And I think that's the message of Job.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's about time for you to go back to the online group, but you wanted to share.
I do. So another concluding thought experiment. I was thinking, so God talks about these animals in stirring, evocative, poetic ways, from the lion to the Leviathan, somewhat unequally. Leviathan gets the greatest amount of space for sure. But it's, behold this, Job, behold Behemoth, look at Leviathan. What if God described Job poetically as well? In other words, if Job truly is kin to these animals, if he is now considered to be a wild creature, so how would God describe Job? And so here's my own imagination at work. Behold my servant Job, a man who persisted in his integrity. No human has so much chutzpah as he. Among his peers, he has no equal. And I will not keep silent concerning his blathering mouth, the word of his lips, the boldness of his speech, the audacity of his convictions. Although he labored in vain in his own defense before his friends, he had no fear. Indeed, he laughed at his friends and denounced their teachings. He scorned the tyranny of tradition, refusing to heed the accusations of his detractors. He did not shut his mouth when the dialogue got turbulent. He remained confident amid a torrent of backlash. And he goes forth and does not repent. He goes forth to where the wild things are, and there he finds his comfort. Dear God, who has let this wild ass of a man go free? I have, and proudly so. Behold my servant Job.
Thank you. All right, we're going to let Bill go back to the online crowd one more time, and we have one more question for those in the room. And I'm afraid no more food, but you're welcome to get more coffee. And we'll be 15, 20 minutes, something like that, and then we'll come back. So the question, how is Job bewildered? What does it teach us about our own place in creation? And then the question that I posed to Bill, what is our responsibility to wild creatures and places like those described in the whirlwind speeches? So please discuss.
Well, welcome back again, Professor Brown. So glad you're here. We've just been learning so much, so many things to think about, so many new ways of looking at Scripture and the book of Job, but also our creation and the world. And I wondered if, we could come back again to that question about what can we learn about the book of Job for dealing with people in suffering situations. And could you just one more time walk me through this perspective you have of we can learn from the book of Job how we're meant to treat those who are suffering. And can you revamp that a little bit?
Yeah.
Connected to this bewilding theme.
Okay, so I think the book of Job is a protest against the tendency to blame the victim.
Okay.
For one thing, that Job is the innocent victim of this wager at the beginning of the book, which is then I think denounced later on because we have a different God at the end. But anyway, Job suffers, and the fact is that he is condemned by his friends,
Right.
and he's there in detention on his ash heap without any mode of recourse except his protestations of innocence. He's been sort of swept up and condemned. And that's the only way the friends can make sense of Job's suffering. And the book of Job, the story of Job, is a protest against that kind of thinking, that kind of treatment, which I think is still prevalent today. And instead, it is to find ways to enter into solidarity with the sufferer and to be restorative. Not punitive, but to be restorative and reparative. You might say that what the community does at the end in the epilogue in chapter 42, they try to repair the damage that has been done towards Job. They begin the process of Job's restoration. That's where I think the narrator becomes most explicit about what our role is and our responsibility is for those who suffer, and particularly those who suffer unjustly. But in any case, it is finding ways to be in solidarity, as the friends try to do at the beginning by sitting silently with Job. And not debating and trying to explain. It's almost as if much of Job is what not to do. It is a negative
Here's how
example.
you don't talk to people that are really in suffering, in pain.
Exactly.
God.
Yeah.
It's funny that the friends talk about God and only Job talks to God.
And I think that comes up at the end.
I do too.
Yeah, yeah. Job is not willing to let go of God.
Right,
Job does not abandon God.
right.
Job challenges God. Job even accuses God of wrongdoing. And Job wants to take God to court. But you know what? I think God says, yeah, do it.
Let-
Uh, I That's great. You're still talking to me, Job.
Right,
Keep talking to me, and eventually we'll sort this out. Not maybe perfectly,
right.
but I'll come and meet you halfway. But not in the way that Job expected or even wanted, which is part of the surprise at the end with God talking about creation.
So coming back to the theme of transformation,
Yeah.
and needing to model transformation, teach it, preach it,
Yeah.
and that transformation being restorative, and that we seek to restore the brokenness
Mhm.
of the world and of relationships. Don't you think it's also kind of interesting that Job forgives the friends and prays for them,
Yes.
even though they have
Right, right.
God himself says, they did not speak rightly about me.
Right. Job has to intervene to prevent God from punishing the friends.
Yeah, but
That's the way the narrator sets it up. But
right.
it does show that's the first indication that Job is transformed.
That's what I was trying
Yeah,
to get to. Is he
exactly.
prays for them and he forgives them
Right.
and reestablishes a community with them.
Exactly, exactly. So even before Job
Yeah,
has his children and lavishes his inheritance upon his daughters, he already begins by forgiving his friends. I mean, there was no hint of that prior to God revealing God's self to Job. I mean, at one point, Job told his friends, the language of betrayal just comes out of Job's mouth again and again and again when it comes to his friends. He condemns them as treacherous comforters.
Yes.
At one point. And so there's no love lost toward his friends in the dialogues. But the change happens after his encounter with God.
Right.
And now Job prays and intervenes on his friend's behalf through forgiveness and the sacrifice on their behalf as well. So that's actually, you're right. That's the first moment of Job's transformation.
So to get back to this theme of connecting that to, and to give animals a central place again, which is where we started.
Yeah, right.
Is it the encounter with the animals can lead to that? Or do you see, like, how, is there a connection? I'm just asking you, do you see a connection between these themes that you've been rightly saying are perhaps for our time preachable? There are things that the church needs to learn to do and to do well, if not from Job, somebody else, but
Yeah.
so is there a connection there? I mean,
And that's part of the mystery as well. Is what does Job learn from the animals
yes,
that leads to his transformation?
yes,
Well, first and foremost, he discerns his connection to the animals. And these animals do more than survive. They thrive. They live off being dependent upon the earth and its sustenance. The animals have this direct connection with the earth that humans tend to deny. And so the binary between man and nature breaks down when Job recognizes his kinship with the animals, even as one of them in a way. And so he is bewildered, and so I guess to play that out, that's interesting. We don't see any of the animals acting punitively. We don't see any of the animals acting really against each other, except we do have, lions hunt for their prey.
right.
So I guess the mountain goats have to be careful, but actually they live in different altitudes, I think. They live in different domains.
That's right. The snow leopard they have to
Yeah,
watch
so
out
they're
for.
so they're all these animals are coexisting and thriving in their own habitats, but they're all together as well as God's wild kingdom.
Right.
And so they're not acting like humans in many ways. They're not acting badly. They can actually play well. There's a verse in with the behemoth that the behemoth lounges among the lotus as the wild animals play. So the behemoth is not chasing after these wild animals to eat them or anything. They're coexisting together. And so learning to coexist with
Right.
with the with not just ourselves as a species, but learning to coexist with other species is what, in a way, what Job learns to do. And the best way forward, uh, back with his friends and now with his family, is to live in a forgiving way and to live in a way that cares and loves others and lifts up the daughters to equal status with the sons against ancient patriarchy.
Well, I hate to let you go, but on the other hand, we probably should. So thank you again so much for sharing with us the insights you've gained from this deep, deep knowledge and understanding of Scripture, especially the sharing the wisdom from the book of one of the books of wisdom, the book of Job. We really appreciate that.
Alan, it's been a
pleasure.
It has been a pleasure and an honor as well. And thanks for the good questions. And I know there were so many more that were left unanswered.
Yeah,
you know what?
Necessarily.
Our sages responsible for the book of Job encourage us to keep asking those questions.
Very good.
Keep trying to respond and to enter into dialogue.
And whatever happens, don't lose that connection with God, even when
you're
mad.
That's right. God can take it.
God can handle that.
Yeah. Very good.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, I'll call your attention back for just a very, very brief ending here. We know that we've gone a bit over time, but I'm going to hand it over to Bill to say a few closing words, and then I have a blessing for us. Go ahead.
So first, thank you. This has been such a stimulating way of conducting a quote unquote lecture turned conversation.
I
think it's a masterful way of making whatever more accessible. There was a question that sort of was repeated in the online conversation about bewilding. And the question was, what is it that Job learned from the animals that led to his transformation?
I like that.
And we also noted, Alan and I noted together that actually the first step of his transformation, or the first evidence of Job's transformation, wasn't when he had his daughters to give his inheritance to, but it was when he forgave his friends. That Job prayed for them. And
offered a
sacrifice, forgiving them.
And
there was nothing in Job's words before that which would ever lead to the conclusion that he would ever forgive his friends.
He's so angry at them.
Considered himself betrayed by his friends, called them treacherous comforters. I mean, they were trading barbs against each other, slings and arrows they were shooting at each other verbally. So that was his first indication of being transformed. And then he had his family. But that question also led me to think, what is it about the animals that Job took with him back to his own culture and society and family? And he bore witness to these animals who were thriving. They were exercising their vital powers to flourish. They weren't ripping each other up. They weren't acting punitively. They were coexisting together, perhaps in different domains. Maybe the mountain goats had to be wary of the lions, but then the mountain goats were living in a different domain than lions. So there was this sort of coexistence, this interdependence of life that these creatures exhibited as they flourished in their own wild community, God's wild kingdom. But also led me to remember an early essay by Professor Terry Fretheim on the praise of nature.
Hmm.
It also ended up being a chapter in his monumental tome, God and the World.
Yeah.
But he made one point that perhaps we can learn how to praise better when we observe the birds singing away, or in my domain, the coyotes howling in the evening, this exuberant praise. They may not be thinking of praising God, but they were certainly enjoying singing and howling. And part of his point is that that's a lesson to be learned for us human beings. Take a lesson from the creatures of the wild and their praise and their singing and their howling. That's a lesson for us to learn, to relearn how to praise God and to do that unceasingly, except when we're lamenting. So,
Yes, right.
but in all things, praying, praising, lamenting, never giving up on God, as Job never gave up on God either, even though he may have felt abandoned by God. Job learned and was transformed and bewildered in his encounter with the wild. They became now part of his wider community. And so it may be so with us as well.
May it be so. Thank you so much, Bill. Let's join and thank Bill Brown. Please. I know we've all learned so much from you. And I should mention, by the way, Terry Fretheim, many of you know this already, taught here at Luther Seminary for 40 some years of blessed memory. So thank you for reminding us of Terry's words about creation's praise of God. So it's been such a delight to have you. Thank you for trying out this new way of doing a lecture. We really put you through the ringer here a bit, but you're good. You're a mensch. You're a great guy, as well as a great scholar. So really, thank you for being here. I'm going to use some words that you wrote in this book, The Seven Pillars of Creation, some phrases you used in this blessing. So receive this blessing, all of you. May the God of creation, the God we know most fully in Jesus the Christ, give you grace to rejoice in wonder and to go forth in wisdom, working for the flourishing of all creation in this beautiful world that God loves so much. So go in peace, serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. Thank you all so much for coming. Safe travels, and be wilded by wonder.